Oh, that tough conversation we gotta have. Are you dreading it? Is it causing you anxiety, causing you stress? Or are you ready to go ahead and crash through that front door and have it? Hey, welcome to another live rare conversation with myself, Tony Jalen, and
Danielle Jalen.
hey, folks. Hey, having tough conversations can be tough. And I think a lot of reasons why we don't have them is because we don't know how to have them. So in today's conversation, we're going to talk about 5 ways and how to have those tough conversations, not only at work, but also at home. So for those who are joining us live on Twitter, hey, good to see you on YouTube, or if you're in the Rare Leaders Facebook community, welcome. So why do most people, avoid or do their best to avoid conflict?
Just the energy that it takes to address the problem and then probably avoiding a fight of sorts.
Yeah. But how many times, like when we avoid the fight, it actually turns into a bigger fight? And we're not talking fist fights, hopefully, but because like avoiding difficult conversations, what I've learned is that it doesn't make them go away. And actually, what I've learned is that it can actually substantially improve home life and work life. Do you think a lot of reasons why like people like fear having difficult conversations because they fear it's going to damage their relationships or negatively impact their home or work environment?
Yeah, because I think sometimes it's just easier to not address it and just to kind of go about stuff instead of ruffling the waters and dealing with it. I don't think that it's sometimes realized that it actually is causing more stress and anxiety by not talking about it.
Yeah, I think it does because I think I can recall a time when it was a work situation where this is like well over a decade ago that I uncovered a situation that was going to happen involving me. Actually, I was going to be taken out of my role. That's what I was told by one of my colleagues. And I found out about it, and literally, it just emotionally hijacked me because I had no idea. At least I felt like everything was going great. And I remember, like, I couldn't sleep for 2 days. And finally, I said, I'm going to have this freaking conversation. And I actually called the regional director at the time and says, hey, we need to talk. And here's the reason why. And he's at the time says, nope, not ready to talk. I'm like, oh, we are going to talk about this because you've been thinking about it a lot longer than I have been thinking about it. And, it helped me out. I mean, was it a difficult conversation? Yeah. But I think, contrary to popular belief, conflict isn't inherently bad. I mean, do you think that difficult conversations are a necessary part of working well with others and having better relationships?
Yeah, I think they can help you grow as a person. I think they can help you open your mind to other perspectives, maybe something that you're not seeing, and can just help in that sense.
Tell us more about that.
Well, I think it's pretty much explained in that. Like, I don't know what else to talk about.
Well, I think too, do you think the reason why people don't have like the difficult conversations because they don't feel safe talking about either work related issues sometimes or home related issues?
Well, I don't know what you mean safe as in
Well, I
talking
think
about
sometimes
like.
people go, well, if I go ahead and bring this up, it may affect my next promotion. If I go ahead and bring this up, they may get really mad at me.
I think it's just important to remember, like, you can only control what is happening right now, and regardless of what the future holds, that's something that you don't really know about anyway.
Right. I think too is that when you don't talk about these issues, it actually creates a toxic culture in your home and your workplace. So I think that's when we start doing having backdoor conversations, either with ourselves or with others. I've seen it happen time and time again. Actually, I just saw on a call here recently today where they were having this conversation where the boss went off on something, and literally no one got to speak anything. No one wanted. They were afraid to speak anything. Like, I get it. So I think that's why the next parts we were going to go through, how to have them, is important. Um, so I think first up, we got to go and talk about preparing for that conversation. Because I think a lot of times when we go into that tough conversation, we have a desired outcome we have in mind. So, like, when the issue weighs on you, is it normal for you to go ahead and imagine a solution without consideration for the other people involved?
I don't really think of anything off the top of my head to like reference it to. So
Well, like, for example, like if we're going to have a conversation, I'm coming up with a solution and figuring it out without sometimes taking into account you or other people that are going to be involved in it. Like, and I guess sometimes there's time and place for you got to do that, right? When it comes to conflict resolution, like someone's got to make a decision on it, and like here's how it's going to work. Um, but I think one of the ways in terms of preparing for a tough conversation is to prepare yourself mentally for it. And because without properly preparing for it, it's possible that a tough talk could into hurt feelings. And we talked about this um, last week. We cannot let our feelings wreak havoc in our lives, right? They're meant to indicate, not dictate. We can recognize them, but then we got to focus on the facts. So I think when you're having a conversation, how do you focus more on the facts versus just feelings?
well, I think some feelings do play some part into it because you have to be able to express like how you're feeling about a situation when you're talking about how it's affecting you and different solutions that can come from it. I don't think that you can completely discount feelings. But I think that as you're talking about it, you have to leave your feelings out of it and talk facts. Like, understand, like, how you're feeling is a fact, but being emotional in how you're talking about it or and not like raising your voice and yelling and getting defensive is important in how you approach the conversation too.
Right. I mean, I think too, a lot of us know from experience that, the earlier you have difficult conversations, the better. 'Cause the longer you let that stew, I ask myself sometimes, like, I've learned better to be quick to listen and slow to speak. I'm like, okay, is this really going to matter a year from now? Like, I literally catch myself doing that at times. Like, okay, quick to listen, slow to speak. And I'll stop myself because I sometimes want to respond and get emotional, versus, all right, just let it play out sometimes. Sometimes that's the best thing. Um, I think the number one thing to do is if you're gonna have a tough conversation, besides preparing, is you gotta consider the situation from their perspective and set your view of the situation aside and from their perspective. Imagine how they feel about having this difficult conversation with you. So, how do you feel that would help in terms of okay, you know what? Actually, taking a step back and put their shoes on your feet.
Well, I think it just obviously depends on the situation. Like, if you're talking, are you going in and challenging somebody's um, authority or decision making? I guess, like looking at it from their perspective, like what were maybe some things that they were thinking about as they were approaching that.
Yeah, I think that's easy to forget too. Because there's a book called "What Women Think," right, and "What Men Think," and there's an exact. I can't remember the book that you and I've read. I can't remember the title. It has like the different colors on it, white boundaries, and it talks about how um, this guy went ahead and cleaned something off, and then pulled the trash out from underneath the counter and put it in the trash, and his wife was like, "Why would you do it that way?" And she said it in that tone. Of course. So of course, you gotta be careful of your tone when you're having these tough conversations. And she stepped back and said, "Okay, I'm just curious. How come you did it that way?" And he literally walked through the steps of why he did the way he did. And I think too, like we're gonna have these difficult conversations with people, and a lot of times it's because we're making a judgment on someone else. Like, they did this. And sometimes I think, well, sometimes we think to ourselves, "Oh, we would never do that," right? But they did that, and sometimes we put ourselves on this higher pedestal than them, and then come back on the same level and go, "Okay, what might be the reasons why they are doing it?" Or maybe simply just asking. So I think when you're going into it, number one, you got to take it from their perspective, and also you got to seek to understand before being understood. Especially if it's one of these things that actually is causing you some stress and some, I call the other word for stress fear, but you just got to have them. And I think also, do you agree on this, that it can actually help you have feelings of empathy throughout the conversation if you take it from another person's perspective?
Yeah, I think that when you, as much as you can understand another person's perspective, um, it only helps you grow as a person to be more understanding in other situations as well.
It's sort of like now, like let's talk about the news for goodness' sake. We don't ever talk about the news much here on Rare Conversations, but let's talk reality. There's some news going on right now, and yesterday I went on Facebook, and for the first time in a long time, I saw people like saying like, "Oh, I can't believe what's going on with this country and this and that." I'm like, "Whoa, what just happened here?" And I think when we're in this kind of environment where there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of noise, instead of get caught up on it, just look at it from their perspective. Because if you don't, it's saying that they don't have a right to an opinion, and then you have a right to an opinion. And is that fair? I say no. I think the second thing is how to have a conversation, how to have a tough conversation. Is have a goal in mind, but be flexible. You know, one of the things that I've learned that having an agenda can actually make tough conversations feel one-sided. And you want to go into it with an outcome. I think when you and I have had like communication wrinkles, all of a sudden I'm sitting there middle way through like, why are we even having this argument? Because it's going like in 50 different directions. And I don't know if you guys are watching, if you've ever gotten to those situations where you're in a discussion and all of a sudden you're like, why are we arguing? You forgot the reason why you're arguing in the first place. So I think that's why it's important to have a goal in mind, but be flexible. And the objective of the conversation is to reach an understanding first. So if you go in there with a solution already in mind, there's nowhere for the exchange to go. So how important do you feel it is to have an outcome but being flexible?
Well, I think it's important to like know what you want to talk about and what you want to express and the way that you want to be heard, but also then being open to solutions from the other side as well.
Right. I think the third thing, thinking about the other side, is working on your listening skills. You just mentioned like we plan and prepare, but when we expect the conversation to go a certain way, and I've done it, and it doesn't go that way, we might rehearse it in our heads ahead of time. While that will help you define like your perspective, figure out where you want to go, could it also hamper your listening?
Yeah, because you're not listening then to hear what the other person has to say. You're just there to talk about what you have on your mind.
Yeah, because is listening. Let me ask you this question regarding listening. Do you feel that listening is a skill that you got to work on?
Mhm.
In what ways have you found best for you to work on it?
I've just been more mindful of like if I'm cutting you off when we're talking and then you snap at me, that I was probably not listening.
I wouldn't say I actually snap at you. I might pleasantly remind you. But it's this thing like, we all gotta work on. I think sometimes it's that we're so heated with our emotions that we don't listen because we gotta go ahead and um, be right, right? And I think too, when you're working through this in terms of the listening thing, you gotta love truth more than being right, and I think that's important because if the truth and whoever possesses it in that conversation, because I think sometimes we go into conversations thinking one thing is right, and we find out after a while that things are wrong, right? Like how we thought is wrong. And the truth and like whoever really like owns it is more valued than the perception that you were the one who knew it first. And then what'll happen is that people get offended then, right? Because I knew that first. No, you didn't. No, you're wrong. I knew it first, right? Um, because at the end of the day, are you here to win the battle or are you here to win the war? Are you here to win the battle or win the relationships? And I think sometimes it's easy to forget that. That's why listening is so important. There's a word reason why listen and silent contain the same letters. What about this thought, Danielle? Is the fourth tip in terms of have a handle a tough conversation. Tough conversations can be emotionally draining, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, how do you take care of yourself to keep a difficult conversation from turning into a fight?
Well, I think just making sure both parties are ready for the conversation and have like an idea of what's going to be talked about so that it's not just an attack of whatever the situation is.
But how do you prepare for that though? Like, is there sometimes you want to have a conversation? Like, I don't know if there's a right time for some conversations. Like that time I had that situation with my boss. Like, I called him up and said, "Hey, we need to talk." He's like, "Oh no, I don't want to talk." And I'm like, "No, we're talking. Like, I'm going through that front door."
Right. Which then, I mean, if you look at it, you are taking it from an emotional standpoint and
100%.
not taking into consideration, like maybe he doesn't have the time to talk right then. Um,
That's true. I was sort of pissed at that moment though. So, and I'm gonna admit, I did let my emotions take the best of me. But what else can a person do to make sure they're taking care of themselves so that way it doesn't get so heated? I mean, we all know. They say stick and stones can break my bones. Words can never hurt me. Whoever said that lied.
well,
Liar. Because they
I think
can.
it goes with the 24-hour rule. No different than taking it from your coaching experience. Like you tell the parents, like if they're upset about something, wait 24 hours to contact you. And I think that that also has to be taken to consideration in having the difficult conversations that you want to have. Like, in 24 hours, if you're still bothered by it, then you need to have the discussion over it.
Yeah, one of the things that helped me in terms of this portion of it and taking care of myself is I write it out. I go in my notes app and let's see here. If you go into my notes app and I look, I have a space for it. I've done this for for a little while now. I got 87 different notes in it. My thoughts about different things, like it's like I'm like I feel like I just go in there and I write it out, and I look back. I'm like, well, Tony, what the hell are you thinking? Like, and then sometimes because I waited, things work themselves out, right? I think in the fifth way to handle tough conversations, the hard conversations, is brainstorm solutions together. Even if you already have a goal in mind, coming to a solution is a joint effort. Because how many times, have you gone to a conversation thinking that you had the right solution to fix a problem, but you came out with a better conclusion after you had a conversation with the other person?
Well, I think discussing how I kind of referenced it earlier is that you can learn things from every conversation that you have, like a different perspective and a different understanding.
Yeah. But how do you go in like that? Because that's easier said than done, right? When we have, I mean, there's two different. There's the thought out difficult conversations, and the ones that just you're just pissed off at that moment or whatever it may be, and you go through the front door with it. Like, how do you get yourself to the point like, okay, I want to work on this as a team. I think that's part of it. Now that I speak out loud, like you got to remember that you both are on the same side of the tennis net. Are you playing doubles against and the enemy is on the other side? In what ways have you kept that perspective? Because that's sometimes easier said than done.
I don't think that it's always about keeping the perspective. I think it's just realizing that it could be an afterthought too, like, that could have been handled in a different way and learning from it.
Well, then you gotta go back and have another kind of conversation, right?
Mhm.
Leave the ego at the door. So there's really 5 different ways which we talked about. Remember, consider the situation from their perspective. Have a goal in mind, but be flexible. Work on your listening skills. Take care of yourself. Because I think sometimes you don't have to come to a conclusion right then and there, right? And then brainstorm solutions together. And I think here's another thing to do, like in terms of having what to do after a difficult conversation. When you've had difficult conversations, what were some things that you did for yourself? Because sometimes challenging conversations can take a toll on us, even if we get the outcome we're hoping for.
I just think be grateful that you were able to talk about it and just know that regardless of what the situation was like, if there were feelings hurt, apologize. If there were, um, even if you don't feel like you need to be the one to apologize, I think that it's important to apologize, and just be grateful that you were able to have the conversation and to be able to share perspective.
You said that A word right there, and we're not talking a hole neither. You said apologize. That's something to do after having a difficult conversation. What does an apology look like? That can be like not a flippant apology, but a true apology.
Well, it's apologizing, like really trying to understand what maybe you did something wrong, apologize for not even recognizing that you were doing something wrong in the situation, um, and apologizing for, whatever it was, and then asking for that forgiveness over it.
I think in addition to that, also thanking the other person for bringing it to you, because that allows you to receive the feedback. Like, you know what? Hey, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I honestly didn't realize it to that. And I think too, you want to like dig deeper on it, like tell me more about what's going on it. But then saying, you know what, Danielle, thank you for letting me know that I've been a little short with you, and bringing that to my attention. Um, you know, I'm sorry that I have been short, and I want to do better. So if you can let me know, like other times, like coming up here, that if I'm being short, don't hesitate to call me out on it so I can be aware of it. If you could do that to help me out. And then finally, will you please forgive me?
Yes, I forgive you, Tony.
All right. So, folks, because that's a difficult conversation, right? Because Danielle shared with me recently that, I've been short and I was thinking the flip side of the coin and I got defensive for a moment. And I think, too, sometimes we realize, okay, people are sharing feedback for a reason. And I think sometimes when you receive it and take it in, you're like, oh, wait a second. Okay. You know what? There's truth to that, right? And sometimes when people are giving us that feedback, we may take offense to it. And I think a question we got to ask ourselves is what someone's sharing with us, is there some truth to it? Is there an element of truth to the comment or the action? Sometimes we don't like being called out. but the truth can be free. And I'm grateful that at least for Danielle and I over the years, we've learned how to have the tough conversations. Because I can tell you the truth, like we're telling you these things because we didn't always do these things. At least I didn't do it. Danielle did, and like because Danielle, she's Danielle. but but if you don't have those difficult conversations, it can make things more difficult. And if you want to have that freedom, I tell you what, at the end of the day, you know what? However it goes, because these conversations are not going to always go perfect. We shared 5 things with you. It doesn't mean that they're going to go perfect, right? Um, and they don't always end as well as we expect them. So you got to make sure to take time to calm down, take a walk, and reflect on any unexpected feelings you may experience or uncover. Because here's the thing, it takes courage and practice to have a difficult conversation. So if you're having them, if you actually take these 5 things and you use them, go ahead and do this. Take your right hand, pat yourself on the back because you did it. So as we finalize here, Danielle, what would you say is any of your final thoughts?
I just think you need to have a difficult conversation just to have it. Looking at how you're gonna feel on the other side of it, whether you do end up spatting it out for a while or whatever it is much more short-lived than walking around avoiding one another and not talking about it and harboring feelings or whatever. Um, I think it's just more important just to have it.
Yeah, I think true too. A lot of people, the other person knows it too. They know something's going on, and they even may know what is going on. And the only way you're going to get better at having difficult conversations is having them, because you'll learn. You'll make mistakes. Mistakes is a sign of progress. So thank you guys all for joining us for another live rare conversation talk. And rare stands for this as a rare leader, a leader who's resourceful, adaptable, resilient, and willing to engage with others. So like last week we talked about being how easily offended are you. Well, now it's time to have difficult conversations to continue to engage more. If you found value in today's conversation, please do share this. It's again, we're on Rare Leaders on YouTube, um, on Twitter, my personal Twitter, and then also if you're not part of the Rare Leaders Facebook group, I encourage you to ask for an invite. Just type in Rare Leaders in your Facebook groups. Until next week, I'm Tony Jalen with
Danielle Jalen.
Onward and